Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mountaineer Farm Talk. My name is J.J. Barrett. I'm the Extension Agent in Wood County for WVU Agriculture and Natural Resources, and also have my co-host. I have John David Johnson.
How are y'all doing today? Looking forward to talking a little bit about some black walnuts. See a lot of them fall and look like a good crop this year.
Yeah, and also we have Evan Wilson. He is our extension agent for A&R down in Cabell and Wayne. What's up this morning, Evan?
I'm doing great. This is a timely topic. We had a lady stop in yesterday in our Wayne office actually looking for some black walnut advice, strategies on how to properly cure and store those walnuts for the winter and how to harvest them right. So this is a timely topic for us down this way. And we got some guys that actually do some black walnut syrup making as well.
Oh, was it cold down there this morning, Evan?
We got a pretty good frost this morning. Right now it's 34 degrees out here.
Yeah, it's the sad ending to the growing season. Randy, how are you doing this morning?
I'm great. How about you? I'm sorry, my phone's ringing there. Just trying to stay warm on this chilly, brisk morning.
Good. It looks like we have our special guest, Mr. Brian Hammons from Hammons Black Walnuts. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Great to be with you all. And nice chilly morning here in Missouri also. It's great.
Yeah, it definitely the end of the growing season here in the Mid Ohio Valley. As far as our introduction, Mountaineer Farm Talk is a weekly podcast featuring interviews with extension service professionals and other agricultural experts about timely topics important to West Virginia agriculture. Our mission is simple: to provide educational, research-based information to people all across the Mountain State. And of course, our special guest from Hammons Black Walnuts, Brian Hammons. Welcome to the program, and give us just maybe a quick background of Hammons Walnuts, how you got started.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, it's great to be with you here this morning. And black walnuts are a wild crop, hand harvested generally during this time of year, October and mid-November. And we see the wild black walnut trees dropping the nuts all over, including in West Virginia and all the way west to certainly Missouri and a little bit further west from here. We started in 1946. My grandfather had a grocery store, Ralph Hammons was his name, and he had a grocery store in Stockton, Missouri, and he shipped some black walnuts to a plant in Virginia in 1945, and that plant didn't continue the next year, and so he went to Tennessee and bought a nut cracking machine and started his own business here in Stockton, Missouri, buying black walnuts. It's just continued to grow since then. And my father grew up in the business and continued on after the Army, led our business for many, many years. And then I've been a part of it since I was out of college and out of law school, and have had a good career, and we keep going. We're 75 years now. So wow. We celebrated an anniversary, and we're thankful to be able to be a part of it. And years ago, we did buy some black walnuts in West Virginia. In recent years, we've been a little bit closer to home in about 12 states here. But we've always thought that at some point, we might be able to get back into West Virginia and Pennsylvania, Virginia, some of those areas where we know there are a lot of black walnuts, and people do know black walnuts and how important they are as an agriculture commodity that's just hand harvested.
Yeah, one of the reasons to spur this topic on, I have several people call my office, as Evan was talking about, and I send them to Integration Acres, which is not that far from Parkersburg near Athens, Ohio. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your how many hulling stations you have and how these collection stations work, and then how the nuts get from there out to what city are you in, Brian?
A little town called Stockton. It's in southwest Missouri, near Springfield. Springfield's kind of the hub that a lot of people know about in the general area, the larger community in the region. Well, we have about 220 or so hulling stations, buying stations all around. About 120 or so of those are in Missouri. So Missouri is the largest production area, has the greatest concentration of black walnut trees. Ohio actually has the second highest number of black walnut trees, according to the foresters that we hear from. And I think West Virginia has quite a few also, as many of your listeners can attest. And we, during the summer, travel the area where we buy and look at the trees and try to determine what the crop looks like. We have a number of buying stations that have been with us for many, many years. So we continue to provide them a hulling machine. Then we look at new places that we might need to have a buying station because they've got a good crop that year, or they traditionally have. We've got somebody that has said, hey, I'd like to consider buying for y'all. So we provide the machine that actually hulls the nut. People pick up the wild nuts during the fall, take them in hull to those stations, and the machine takes the hull off the nut. The hulling station operator, whether they're a feed store or a corner grocery store or some other business, or even just a farmer, will operate the machine and buy the nuts, pay the person based upon the hulled weight, which this year, it's the highest price ever, $18 per 100 pounds east of the Mississippi. Last year it was 15, so it's up significantly. We really need the crop of nuts and encourage folks to get out and pick up those nuts. And that's what we felt like. Hopefully, it would help encourage folks to do that. So the nuts then come back to us in Stockton, Missouri, by truck. So truck freight is a bit more of an issue this year than it has been in the past, but that's how they come in. We're in the process of getting loads in even now from the east, and that'll continue through November. We usually start the harvest around October 1st and go until early to mid-November. This year, November 15th, which is a Monday, is the last day of the official harvest. Most operators will continue till then. We're hearing from some that they want to continue to go after that this year because the nuts stayed on the trees a little longer, and they do see a crop. And now that the nuts are down, more people are picking them up and bringing them in. So we plan to continue at least through November 15th, and in some places a little bit longer than that. There's another location not too far from parts of West Virginia in Gallipolis. Looks like just across the border.
Gallipolis, Ohio.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's just right across the border there. It might be helpful for some folks in the southern and southwestern part of the state.
Yeah, Brian, about how many tons of walnuts do you guys process there at your plant every year?
Yeah, it's very different than the walnut or English walnut industry in California. Of course, the wild black walnuts, we'll average around 20 to 22 million pounds a year. Wow. Of hulled black walnuts. That's the buying weight. There's a lot of moisture and some hull debris that's on the nuts that we have to clean off before. So of what we buy, we only get about 7% of good nut meat. So if we process, buy 100,000 pounds of nuts, we'll only get about 7,000 pounds of good nut meats in the box ready to sell. And that low yield is much different, very different from other tree nuts. People who have cracked black walnuts understand that because it's a very thick shell and very hard. So that's one reason that black walnuts are a little more expensive on the store shelf than English walnuts or even pecans.
Yeah, it's almost hard to fathom that all those walnuts are basically all those you're telling us are all harvested by hand, or most of them.
Pretty much. There's a little device called a nut wizard. It's a basket that is hand operated, but it reduces the amount of bending over that people have to do. That little device rolls along the ground and the nuts fit between the wires. And so it makes picking up nuts a little bit easier, but it is still hand done. So yeah, they are all hand harvested in the wild. very different than the agriculture crop in the West.
Now, can people bring their walnuts to you to just get them cracked and then get back, or do y'all straight buy and just then process and resell?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people who pick up black walnuts want a few of the nuts from their own trees to crack at home. So when they bring them to the hulling station, generally they may be selling several bags or pickup load, and they'll want to take a couple of pounds home with them. And we just generally do that, you know, put them in a separate bag and give it to them. If they bring us several pounds of nuts and don't want to sell any, but want us to hull them for them, then there's a little hulling charge for it generally.
Okay.
If they want us to crack them for them, we're not really set up to do that. We don't have cracking machines at the buying stations. They're simply hulling machines. But a lot of people do like to sit around at home and crack themselves, and that's kind of a hard thing to do. There are some specialized nut crackers. One gentleman in Missouri is an old bass fisherman. He made Grandpa's Goody Getter, and I think he's still selling some of those online too, which is it works pretty well.
Now, if you have an access to just say a pecan cracker, now what's the difference in a pecan cracker and a walnut cracker? Can they be interchanged?
Well, you can crack a pecan with a black walnut cracker, but you can't crack a black walnut with a pecan cracker. How's that?
Okay.
That shell is so thick and hard. A pecan cracker or an English walnut, just a little hand cracker, it's not very big or heavy, just won't do the job. There are some crackers for black walnuts that are hand operated. They're a little more heavy duty that you can get. We sell some in our catalog. But generally in the industry, for cracking pecans or cracking English walnuts, you use a little bit different method than we have to do with black walnuts. We've got big steel wheels that come together to crack the black walnut. The outer shell is very thick, but there's some inner shell also that has to be cracked, and it's a lot more of a challenge. And then we've got to separate all that shell from the few good nut meats, and that's another challenging step. That
we had a question talking about those shells that Tom Basin just put up there. It says, do you sell those shells?
We actually do, yes. The shells are a large part of what we end up with when we buy the nuts. So we have a business specifically for the shell. We grind the shells into 6 basic sizes and sell that for industrial cleaning and polishing. It's used in cleaning gun casings, for example. It was actually used to clean the Statue of Liberty way back when, before the bicentennial, I think it was. And it was used to clean battleships, used to clean jet engines. Today, it's used a lot in the oil industry as filtration media to separate oil from water, that they're using a lot in processing oil. And now it's also used in ball fields, soccer fields. Instead of putting crumb rubber on the artificial surface, they can use the black walnut shell on the top, and there's some benefits to that.
Very good. I would have had no clue that you could use shells for that many different things. I mean, that's pretty neat.
Quite
JJ?
a lot. Quite a lot. And they used to make dynamite using black walnut shells as a filler also, and I think some folks still do that.
Do you have
Brian,
specialized machines that, I'm sorry, it's Brandy. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Brandy.
Do you have specialized machines that grind them up into, are they in the blocks or, just loose hulls that are fine ground, or how do you market those?
Well, the shells themselves, after they come out of the cracking plant, are fairly good size. And there's some little pieces too, but there's big pieces of shells. And then we run them through a hammer mill to grind the shell over a period of time. It's very abrasive, and it knocks the shells into different pieces. The shell is very hard, but it will break up under a certain amount of pressure. We then take all of the ground shells and run them through a sizer screens to separate it into different sizes. And we find that the medium size grind of shell is the most popular. the most useful for many things. I hope that answered your question.
We had another question from the audience, Brian, about what's the moisture content of the shell after you dehull it, and how dry is it when you begin cracking?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably about 20 to 30% moisture is still in that nut when we buy it. The hull itself is very, very moist, a lot of moisture in that, but there's a lot of moisture still in the nut. We find almost 30%, maybe 25 to 30% of what we buy is moisture and a little bit of hull debris. So that has to be dried off. So it's pretty moist. And we need to get it down to where the nuts in shell are somewhere closer to 10 or 11% before we can really crack it. And the shell actually holds more moisture than the nut meat does. Nut meat is a lot of oil. About 58% oil is in the black walnut nut meat. Of course, it's all good oil and good fat content, unsaturated, no cholesterol, very healthy, as well as a lot of protein. That's another story.
Brian, is that another one of your products you sell? Would be the black walnut oil, or?
It is. Since black walnut has a good amount of oil in it, we have developed and worked with a company to extract the oil. They actually roast the nuts, and we're using very fine pieces of black walnuts in this situation, very tiny, that people don't want to eat as much, but it actually works much better for oil extraction. They roast it, and then they extract the oil, and that works very well. We just started selling that maybe 10, 11 years ago. Displayed it at the Fancy Food Show, won a Sophie Award with it. It's got a nice smooth flavor as a finishing oil, kind of like an olive oil, and you can use it to saute with, as well as a finishing oil.
Now, Brian, what is a Sophie Award? Is this for the Food Network, or some kind of a food award?
It is a food award. The Fancy Food Show in New York, they've had it in Washington a couple of times. The specialty foods industry, there's an association of specialty foods that has this every year, and they have different categories for these awards. It's kind of like an Emmy award for food.
Oh, there you go.
And they make a big presentation, but we won that for specialized oils. Olive oil always wins first prize, so we kind of got second.
Yeah, we had another question from the audience, Brian. If the nuts sit on the ground before the harvest, I guess if they sit there too long, will they lose quality or go bad eventually?
That's a great question. Yes, they will. And so we encourage people to pick up the nuts fairly soon after they hit the ground while they're still relatively green. The best time is as soon as they fall. If they stay on the ground for several weeks, they'll turn black and get mushy, and they won't be able to dry inside there. So the nut meat will eventually turn dark and begin to rot. And that's one reason that we limit the buying season to the time when the nuts have still fairly fresh. They can come in. One of the challenges is that some folks like to put the nuts in plastic bags, or they like to put them in some kind of a container that doesn't allow air to come in, and they sit there, and then 3 or 4 weeks later they bring them in and they're all mushy and gooey, and the hull doesn't come off very easily, and the nut meat has deteriorated a bit. There was a study at the University of Missouri a few years ago that looked at the effect of delay on hulling the nuts, and it showed pretty clearly that there's some deterioration of the nut meat quality, a little darkening of the nut meat over time as it sits on the ground.
So when they pick these nuts up, they need to be putting them in something that like a corn sack that has a lot of airflow in them. And how big of a bag, a corn sack, I mean, it's like a 50-pound bag sack, the size. Or would you go with something smaller, like your oyster shelled sacks or something like that?
We take the nuts in whatever people bring them in. And I would simply encourage them to to get them in fairly soon after they pick them up, whatever they put them in. And if it's an enclosed container, get them in real quick, because it doesn't take very long for them to start to rot. We have a lot of folks that bring them in a pickup truck, in the bed of a pickup, and that works out nicely. And they're still open. They're easy to put in and take out, scoop out. Most people do use some kind of a bag or a barrel or bucket to haul them in. We have even had people who bring them in with the nuts in the back seat of their car, open, or in their trunk. The lady who brought them in a Lexus in the trunk, I think got a rude awakening after the nuts were unloaded. So
You
some
see a little
debris
bit of
left
everything.
over, and little squirmy things too.
I know my coworkers here, usually work very close with the fair, and we've seen it all too. I've had a van pull up and 3 pigs in it to be tagged for the county fair. So, it wouldn't surprise me to see what people do with the black walnuts either. And that kind of gets me thinking though, I'm an animal guy. I like beef cattle, forages, and I'm always thinking about byproduct feeds for cattle. And a lot of my farmers do as well. Is there been any research? Could you grind these walnuts up that might not be as desirable to eat to make them fine enough to use in the beef industry for feed?
Absolutely. Yes. We have a product that is basically animal feed that we sell to cattle farmers particularly. That can be used for other animals as well. But in the process of shelling black walnuts, we have some darker nut meats and some off-colored nut meats and things just aren't quite as good for people to eat that we pick out. And those are then used for cattle feed. Sometimes it's very fine meal also that's used in feed. It's very high energy. The same kinds of nutritional benefits for people are there for animals. High fat, good fats, and protein. So the protein content is something that's very attractive to folks who are developing different feeds. We have some cattle farmers in our area that use this, mix it with some other feed ingredients as a complete feed. So yes, absolutely can. We do that. A pretty good amount, several hundreds of thousands of tons actually, that works out pretty well.
Okay, I know we do the same thing. Where I was raised in South Georgia, we have a lot of peanuts, and we use the peanut hulls, grind them with a filler. But every once in a while, you'll get a load that's got a lot of what we call pegs, and that's what we mash for the oil, in the industry. And you'll grind all those pegs up, and it is so rich that sometimes you got to be careful because it'll go right through them with all that fat content.
Yeah.
But it makes great protein, great fat, but you just got to watch how much you're feeding them.
Yep, that's right. It's like a lot of things that with black walnut, you try to use everything that you've got. Same thing with any agriculture commodity, whether it's an animal or a plant. There's always a good use for the byproducts, for the things that aren't the main focus of the industry. And that's what we do with black walnuts. The shells, the animal feeds, the oil stock, pressing some of the fines for oil, all those kinds of things. The major focus is the nut meat, the black walnut kernel, which, as I said, is about 7% of what we buy. That's part of the challenge. We can get some machines that'll get even more that way. That's a good thing. And we have over the years. But that's the food item that people are really excited about. The bold flavor of black walnut that a lot of folks in West Virginia know and love. It's just incomparable. And they use it a lot this time of year in fall baking, cooking, some traditional recipes that folks have had for generations.
Brian, we have Evan, do you have the question for the audience?
That's what I was going to read the question from the audience is on getting the meat out. How do you crack the nut to get the full half pieces of walnut, or those that are brought in the store English walnuts?
Yeah, the half of a black walnut's very hard to get. In fact, it's almost impossible. We can't do it with machines that we use. Most black walnuts actually don't even have a half of a black walnut because they're just so thick. There's so much inside shell structure. The English walnut, of course, halves are very common, and that's what they're really after. So with the black walnut, it's basically pieces, large pieces, medium pieces, small pieces. Some very thin shelled black walnuts, some of the improved varieties that we've seen, some hobbyist growers will have, they might find some black walnuts that you can hand crack and pull a half out of it. We're not able to get enough of those to really market them effectively. Even with the improved varieties, it's pretty much very large pieces.
And another question we have from the audience was, was there tannin?
Yeah,
Is there a
tannin.
tannin content in the animal feed nuts?
The tannin content,
Yes.
I'd probably have to go back to some feed experts to find that out. So I can get you that if you need to.
Yeah.
But down my area of the state, sorry, JJ, we have some guys that do a lot of maple syrup production. A couple years ago, they were starting to work with black walnuts for their syrup. Is that something, a byproduct you all work with as well, or is that something y'all kind of stay away from?
Work with black walnuts for what again?
Syrup?
Syrup. Oh, yeah. You know, I've heard about tapping the black walnut tree for syrup, and I know it's possible to do that. We haven't really gotten into that much here in Missouri. I think in some states to the east, there may be a little bit more of that produced where they're used to tapping trees for syrups. But I've heard that it can be done and that it makes a very nice syrup. I'd like to get some. If somebody out there is doing that, we might be a customer. I'd like to have some for our store. Our black walnut syrup that we offer in our store is basically regular maple syrup with some black walnuts in there, infusing the black walnut flavor with the syrup.
Wow. Brian, I wanted to circle back a minute to the kind of tell the audience what some major differences are between the black walnut and the English walnut, and maybe why the black walnut might be more sustainable here for in the United States.
Yeah, that's a great question. English walnuts are very common, and they're marketed as walnuts. So it's a worldwide commodity. They're grown all over the world. People eat them all over the world, sometimes in shell and sometimes in nut meats. When you go to a restaurant and you see something with walnuts in it, that's going to be an English walnut, probably from California. Almost all of the English walnuts are grown in California. So really there are two major differences between Juglans nigra, which is black walnut, and Juglans regia, which is the walnut or English walnut. The first difference is, I think, most important for consumers, and that's the flavor. The flavor of the English walnut is relatively mild. It's a larger nut, and it has a crunch. Most people eat that not so much for the flavor, because it's fairly mild, but for the crunch. And you can eat it as a snack nut also. Get it in shell and crack the nuts and do that. For an ingredient, black walnuts have a much bolder, richer flavor. It's very robust, earthy. Some people like to eat it hand to mouth. Most people use it more as an ingredient in different foods. Home baking, ice cream. It's very popular in ice creams. Black walnut ice cream is a very popular flavor in some regions of the country because that flavor comes through. It permeates whatever you've got. If you've got a chocolate chip cookie and put black walnuts in it, all of a sudden that cookie tastes different. It's got a more robust flavor. Regular walnuts will give it a crunch, but you won't get quite the flavor through that. So the flavor is the biggest difference. Black walnuts do have a little bit more protein than English walnuts, but the nutritional profile is very similar. So you get a lot of the same nutritional benefits in a black walnut that you get with English walnuts, and there have been a lot of studies on those. The second big difference is the sourcing. The sourcing of black walnuts is wild. Trees in yards, fields, pastures, hillsides, wherever they're growing, And it's right here in the Midwest and the eastern part of the United States. Technically, it's the eastern black walnut is what we work with. And it's native to Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and states to the west, all the way through Missouri. It's the wild walnut that the early settlers found as they were coming through the country. And a lot of people use it. Lewis and Clark expedition, there's a recipe for a bread that apparently was made in the Lewis and Clark expedition from those wild black walnuts that they found. So it's an American product. It's a uniquely American. The walnut, or English walnut, is cultivated. It originated in Persia, and it was brought to the United States and grows in California primarily in orchards. The soil there, the sand, and the climate there is very conducive to growing lots and lots and lots of English walnuts. It's a huge crop out there, over 1 billion pounds every year, compared to what we get with black walnuts, about 20 to 22 million pounds. And of course, the nut meat yield with English walnut is much higher. It's more like 45% because of that thin shell, whereas black walnut is about 7%. So the sourcing and the flavor are the two big differences between walnut and black walnut.
Evan, do we have another question from the audience?
We do, and that is an age-old question in our neck of the woods is, how do you get the black walnut smell and scent off of your hands?
Time. Yeah, I'm sure there are people who talk about using some grit, maybe even some black walnut shell grit, to wash their hands with, the old lava soap with pumice and things like that, and it helps a little bit, but it just takes time to get that dark stain off of your hands once you get them on there.
So we're gloves.
The smell is just wonderful. I don't know why anybody would want to get rid of that.
Well, maybe that can be one of your next products, the scented candles.
Yeah, it's always fun in August or so when we start seeing more black walnuts on the trees. Go up to one of them, maybe one of them was falling on the ground, and I pick it up and smell it, and it's like, yeah, okay, black walnut harvest time is coming.
Maybe a black walnut soap.
Black walnut soap, yeah. Well, there are some that use black walnut shells as the gritty substance.
Okay.
There's some facial scrubs that have used black walnut shells also as the gritty material to clean the pores and facial.
Brian, as I was looking on the website, I saw there are some improved varieties that they've developed. There's some, what is the outlook for having, similar to like orchards where some people would grow some of these improved black walnut varieties for harvest?
Yeah, that's a great question. There have been people who have experimented with black walnut trees that they have found over the years that had thinner shells, and these are scientists, botanists, people who are just interested in the trees and what makes for a good nut and how they can reproduce those. Some are at universities, some are simply individuals that are interested in those kind of things, nut growers. From our standpoint, long term, we're going to need more nut meats, more nuts to supply more people as consumption grows. We know that wild crop has some growth potential, but also the future real growth is going to be coming from landowners that grow black walnut trees for nut production, and they cultivate them specifically for that purpose. Improved variety basically are nuts from trees that have been discovered to the trees produce a nut with a thinner shell and a still good bold flavored nut meat, but more nut meat inside that shell. And many times they have a timing that they a little bit later so that they're not subject to frost. They are resistant to anthracnose or other diseases, tend to be that way. And so they identify those, and they actually graft a cutting from that good tree onto a rootstock, and they reproduce that tree. And over the years, there are a number of named varieties that were produced that way. The Sparrow, Quick Crop, McKay, Football, Thomas are some of the more popular, well-known names that are being planted out there. But there's some new ones also that are being developed at the University of Missouri and other places that hopefully will get out there with a yield of more like 30% to 35% nut meat instead of about 16% or less on the wild nuts on a dry weight basis. So it makes a big difference. So we're paying more for those nuts to those growers. We bought about 40,000 pounds last year, so not a lot, but it's a start. And about a dozen growers would bring those nuts in, and we evaluate them and test them and buy them on a grade and yield basis. And that's very similar to the way that pecans are purchased from orchards, also English walnuts, I think, too.
Yeah. Brandy, do you have one of our team here for the Mountaineer Farm Talk, her county has the Black Walnut Festival. So Brandy, do you have any questions for Brian?
Yeah, well, the number one question I've just been waiting is, how do we get him back to West Virginia? We've got all kinds of black walnuts here, and I was listening and taking some notes on, how to help educate our producers, the people that have those nut trees growing all over their landscape, is to get them up early and make sure they don't stay in the bags too long and all that good stuff. But how do we get some hauling stations put out here in West Virginia to help the landowners here and celebrate the black walnut by buying some of those nuts and getting those to you guys?
That's great, Brandy. A great question, and we'd love to talk with you more about that. I'll get Miles Bright, who is in charge of our buying operations, and he and I have talked about growing our areas and getting back into some of those places that we used to buy in. So we'll want to talk further down the road. You really need to have a certain volume to be able to make it work for a buying station. We say 50,000 pounds, probably at least 80,000 pounds in the east, a couple of loads anyway, capability before it really makes sense for somebody to operate a buying station and go through all the details of what that means. But you might be able to do that, and the freight would be one of the challenging issues. We need to cover that somehow. But you've got a couple of locations in Ohio that aren't too far away from you. And are you around Spencer by any chance?
Yeah, that's where we're located, in Spencer,
Okay.
West Virginia. So,
well, I've got to thank you, because Spencer was the inspiration for our Black Walnut Festival here in Stockton.
oh, nice.
We've been doing this for 61 years. My great uncle Clarence Cavender traveled through Spencer in 1959, 60, and discovered the Black Walnut Festival.
Yeah.
And Stockton wanted to do something community-wise, some kind of a festival, and he said, "Hey, Spencer's got a Black Walnut Festival, and we've got a new Black Walnut business. Why don't we call it the Black Walnut Festival?" So they did, and now it's a wonderful tradition here in Stockton at the end of September every year. So we thank Spencer for that. And I guess it's still going, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You're very welcome. We do a black walnut judging contest and a hickory nut judging contest. And some of these gentlemen on the call have helped serve as judges in that. We have people are always looking for black walnut flavored things and creations, using the wood. So that's a big thing at our festival. We have a nut run. We have
good. How is it, a 5K?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a 5K, and then we even have a band festival, and we have a nut bowl where the football teams from the neighboring county come to play the football team in our local high school. So I mean, it's a 4 days of a lot of fun, and we have a grand parade. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't had that the past 2 years. It's been very pared down. So we're hoping by next year to get back to a more normal festival, but it's a highlight definitely, not only for the Spencer community, but for our whole county. So,
Well, that is terrific. And it becomes a community event. We've kept ours going, and thankful for being able to do that. Sounds like we do a lot of the same kinds of things.
yeah.
And so I'd love to compare notes one of these days on that.
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah, Brian, we have a couple questions from the audience. For my question about the hauling station, is there a you said that there's you need at least 50 to 80,000 pounds, but how many, is there kind of say a square mile area, or within so many, how far apart are the stations usually?
Yeah, here in Missouri, with the concentration of trees, we try to put them about 15 or 20 miles apart. Other areas, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, sometimes it can be 40 or 50 miles between buying stations, just because it's a large territory. And we try to look at how far will people be willing to transport the nuts to sell them. Try to look at the places of greatest concentration, where you have the best chance of getting a good amount of nuts. So I guess the question as far as radius is, how far will people want to go to find the market to sell the nuts? And it's hard to get folks to go more than about 30 miles. Some people will do that, but usually 20 to 30 miles is pretty much the limit. So if you've got a good concentration of nuts in the area within about 10 miles, good chance that you can get the word out. And the first year, it does take some time because people just aren't used to picking up the nuts. One of the challenges that we've had or wondered about is people's willingness to get out and work and do things to make a little extra money. And that's been a challenge, and we've wondered about that for a long time. And usually when there's a good crop of nuts, and there are a lot of nuts out there on the ground, we've found that people want to pick them up and not waste those nuts and take advantage of that money on the ground. Society's changing, and we're finding that maybe there aren't quite as many people that see the value in that. But we hope that there will continue to be new people and folks who have grown up picking up black walnuts, passing that on to their next generation, teaching the children a little work ethic, and letting them see that if they go out and work a little bit, they get some money to spend. And if you want some extra money to spend, you don't just hold your hand out, you go out and do something for it. Find some black walnuts on the ground, for example, and get some permission to pick them up, of course.
Also, Brian, I guess what's in it for the farm? If we do maybe have a farmer that wants to volunteer to have one of these hauling stations, do they make any money from the operating the hauling station?
Oh, good point. Yes, they do. We pay a commission to that individual because they're putting out their time, their labor, they're fronting the money, I guess you might say. They're paying the individuals who bring the money in, the nuts in, and then we reimburse them for that, plus a commission. Lately, I think it's about $5.50 per 100 pounds, which is not too bad. And they also are providing the power to operate the machine, whether it's electric or gas. So a lot of folks do fairly well if they buy 100,000 or 200,000 even pounds of black walnuts, and they do it year after year and find it to be very beneficial. Many times it's a supplement to their existing business as well. Feed stores usually would be dealing with people who will have black walnuts on their property. So it's a natural extension of their business and providing a service to their customers to be able to buy the black walnuts.
JD, it looks like we have some other questions from the audience. Are there other companies processing and selling black walnuts around the country?
Right now, I'm not aware of any that are doing it on a large scale. I think individuals sometimes do. they'll process some crack in a small scale, some of the nuts coming off of their own trees, is particularly the hobbyists that are growing improved variety nuts. So we see that a little bit in the nut growers organizations, and that's good. As far as commercial, I think we're the only one that is able to continue doing that. There used to be other people in the business that got out for various reasons. It's not easy, and as the food industry has become more challenging, and the requirements to provide a safe, quality food product have become greater, and expectations by customers and consumers, it's just harder and more costly to do all those things. Well, we've thankfully been able to keep up and do those things and adapt. These are things that larger nutting industries have to do, and we have to also. We've got some pretty large customers that continue to increase their requirements because their consumers are expecting that, for one thing, that they don't expect that there be any shells in the nuts that they get. 40 years ago, a lot of consumers picked up a package of any kind of nuts and they thought, well, there might be a shell in there, so I better look at it. Not so much today. So we've got to do even better keeping the shells out of the nuts, and certainly making sure that there's nothing in there that could cause any sickness or things like that. And so the food safety laws have just continued to ramp up, and as well as expectations, and we've kept up with that, and I think people can feel comfortable with our process. We have SQF, Safe Quality Food, which is an industry standard now for large companies that you just have to be able to do in our plant process. So it's a challenge. So other companies, I think, who have gotten out of the black walnut business years ago didn't have succession. They may have had the family that started the business, and they got older, maybe passed on, and there's nobody to take it over. Didn't have leadership succession. We've been thankful that my dad took on the leadership of our business, and I think he's pleased that I've been able to do that too, and thankful to be able to keep going, and a lot of good people that it takes in the organization to and transitions that you have. And thankfully, we've been able to navigate those waters and continue. You're not guaranteed anything. We do a lot of praying and just thanking God for each day and each new opportunity each year. We've got 75 of them. We're not guaranteed 76. We're thankful for every day. And this year's crop is very important. Next year's crop will be just as important when next year comes, but we've got to get there first.
Ryan, another question we had from Ms. Cunningham is pooling the walnuts over several counties, a possibility in when making that trip? Because we do a lot of pools in West Virginia because we're kind of, we got a lot of geographical difficulties with ridges and mountains and hard travel. So, we do a lot of pools where we pool in one area, pool here, and then we bring them all together. So is that a possibility with black walnuts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have some growers in Nebraska that are operating improved variety nuts, and they all produce a few of them, and they kind of pool them all together to get them whole and then bring them into the plant and market them together. You can very easily do that same thing for regular wild black walnuts, West Virginia or any place where you have a collection place where people just bring them in and put them in hull. You need to get them pretty quickly to the hulling station. But yeah, that's something we have thought about setting up over the years, and hadn't done that. One of the challenges is getting a huller that's bigger and able to have greater capacity to run a little faster. If you aren't necessarily looking at running a lot more volume than the typical huller does, but simply accumulating it in small batches from different places, I think it can work pretty well. You could pool 1,000 pounds at a time or something like that. You know, people bring in a couple of 100 pounds and pool those and bring them all in together. We just kind of do the numbers and see what would work.
What we've done in the past, you know, with other, you know, commodities is like we might have 4 pools, and then we get those. Could we utilize maybe a like one operation in one spot where this side of the state brings their nuts in a large trailer on this day, and then another one and another one and another one? I mean, do you think
I'm
that would
sure?
work?
Yeah. I
That way
like
it'd
the
be
creativity.
stationary.
I like the creativity, something that would fit your area. The big key is get the hull off as soon as possible. You know, don't keep the nut in hull in a container for very long before you get the hull off.
Okay.
By very long, a few days is fine.
Yeah, Brian, we had another question. Do you have instances where people will slip in butternut, hickory butternuts, English walnuts, and then do you have to sort them out, or how do you sort those out?
You know, when we're buying black walnuts at hulling station, we're pretty much running whatever they bring through the huller. And unfortunately, sometimes things that are left in the back of the pickup go through the huller. So we have all kinds of things, and sometimes it's not good on the machine. So that's why we have a lot of steps before the nuts go through the cracking machine to sort out any of the rocks or, you know, wrenches or
Hammers,
whatever might
bar.
have been gotten in there. But and there could be some butternuts, some hickory nuts. Usually there won't be very many of those. There might be one tree in there, but people are pretty good about not trying to pick up those. If there's a good concentration of it, a strong concentration, when they're loading the hulling machine, they'll see the difference right away. Now, butternut's a little less obvious, but hickory nut, you'd be able to see, okay, all of a sudden you've got a half a load of hickory nuts coming through. So, whoa, wait a minute, we can't take those. So that's not really a practical problem. There could be a nut here and there that goes in, but it's not a major issue for us.
Do we have any more questions from our audience? Brian, we always have one question that I ask, you know, that my dad said that there were 2 types of music, country and Western. So I have to ask who your favorite country artist is.
Oh my goodness. Who my favorite country artist is. There are, I don't really listen to much new material. You know, just thinking about, probably would be some folks that have bridged the gap and crossed over a little bit. And I grew up in the era of John Denver.
Wow.
He did that. I mean, he's got a great song that talks about West Virginia.
There we go.
And so I would have to say John Denver, and I like to sing along with him too.
Uh-oh. Are you pandering to the audience here?
Am I what? Well,
Pandering to the audience.
no, I do like John Denver and sing along with him, but that just reminded me that he does have a song there.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, John Denver. Any more questions from the audience? Brian, we really appreciate you getting on the Mountaineer Farm Talk. You've really been a great guest. We've had a lot of good conversation. Jay, do you have anything to add?
I think we're good. Thank you so much for joining in, and thank everyone else for joining in as well, and to the Mountaineer Farm Talk. And I guess I'll sign off. Till next time, we'll see you around the ridge.
Yeah, and I just want to add that any of our programs and activities offered by West Virginia University Extension Service are available to all persons without regard to race, color, sex, disability, religion, age, veteran status, political belief, sexual orientation, national origin, and marital or family status. So again, we appreciate everyone tuning in today, and especially our special guest, Brian Hammons from Hammons Black Walnuts. So if anyone's out there, they can hit your local grocery store in our area. I know Kroger's carries those, and add that to your favorite recipe, right, Brian?
Absolutely. Black walnuts are wonderful this time of year for Thanksgiving and all the fall baking, and of course the ice cream too.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good weekend. We'll see you next week with next week our guest will be Patrick Donnelly, and he is from Timber Safe from our WVU Extension Safety and Health, and he'll be talking about safety and maintenance with chainsaws going into the firewood season. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Like
Thank you, Brian.